Wages to wagers. The stake economy. How AI, markets, and synthetic signals turned work, truth, and survival into a field of wagers. By Alfonso Lopez. Full manuscript draft. Alfonso Lopez is a writer and cultural analyst focused on the changing relationship between labor, risk, and survival in contemporary life. His work examines how stable employment is giving way to a more speculative, platform-driven, and uncertain economic reality. He writes for readers seeking a clearer understanding of the forces reshaping work, earning, and everyday life. Table of Contents. Introduction: The moment the equation broke. Part 1: The fall of wages. Part 2: The rise of wagers. Part 3: How the game works. Part 4: The machine enters. Part 5: The new hierarchy. Part 6: The trap. Part 7: The choice. Part 8: Intimate wagers. Conclusion: The equation rewritten. Introduction. The moment the equation broke. There was a time when the equation felt stable. Work hard. Stay consistent. Move forward. It wasn't a perfect promise, but it was a believable one. The idea that effort could compound into stability wasn't just an economic principle, it was a cultural operating system. It told people who they were, what they were worth, and where they were going. It gave work a moral gravity. If you did your part, the world would eventually meet you halfway. That equation hasn't vanished. It has simply stopped behaving reliably. Today, people can work hard and still feel stuck, underpaid, replaceable, or one unlucky breakaway from collapse. They can watch others, sometimes less qualified, sometimes less ethical, sometimes simply better positioned, make money through timing, leverage, speculation, or information. Not always fairly, not always sustainably, but visibly. This creates a fracture, not between rich and poor, not between left and right, but between two competing logics. The logic of wages and the logic of wagers. This is not a book about gambling. It is a book about a shift in how value is created, measured, and pursued. The wage system was built on the belief that effort leads to reward over time. The wager system is built on the belief that reward goes to those who position correctly under uncertainty. One is linear. The other is probabilistic. One rewards consistency. The other rewards timing. One depends on trust. The other depends on edge. We are living in the overlap, a world where both systems coexist, collide, and confuse each other. A world where people still want meaning from work, but increasingly suspect that meaning alone won't pay the bills. A world where AI accelerates productivity for some, replaces tasks for others, and forces everyone to rethink what work even is. A world where bots shape the informational field people use to form opinions, and where markets price not just assets, but events, beliefs, and human behavior. This book is about that transition. How it happened, why it feels disorienting, and what comes next. Part 1: The Fall of Wages. Chapter 1: The Promise. The wage system was built on a simple, almost elegant belief: effort leads to reward over time. It didn't guarantee fairness, but it offered direction. You could move upward. You could build something. You could become someone. For decades, that belief held just enough to function. People trusted institutions, employers, and the future, not blindly, but enough to keep going. Work wasn't just a transaction. It was a story. A way to make sense of your place in the world. But the system depended on something fragile: alignment between effort and outcome. When that alignment weakens, the story weakens with it. The wage system wasn't just an economic arrangement. It was a psychological contract, a cultural script, a stabilizing myth. And like all myths, it worked until it didn't. Chapter 2: The Fracture. That alignment is breaking. People still find meaning in their work. Surveys show more than 80% of Americans believe their job has a positive impact on society, but meaning no longer guarantees stability, mobility, or security. Engagement is low. Burnout is high. Job satisfaction is middling. and belief in the future of work is unevenly distributed. You can do everything right and still feel like the ground is shifting under you. This is not the collapse of work. It is the decoupling of effort and reward. And the fracture isn't just economic, it's epistemic. People used to assume their opinions were their own. Now, the informational environment is a probabilistic fog. A recent study analyzing more than 19 million Twitter accounts found that bots rarely persuade people directly. They don't argue, debate, or convert. Instead, they shape the exposure layer, the accounts people follow, the content drifting across their feed, the ambient noise that becomes the background assumption. Meaning, people think they're forming stances. Often, they're absorbing them. The wage system depended on a shared sense of reality, a belief that the world was at least legible. When the informational substrate becomes automated, manipulated, and optimized for engagement rather than truth, belief becomes harder to sustain. The fracture is not just in the paycheck. It's in the signal. Chapter 3: The Uneven Dream. Belief in upward mobility has become stratified. Older and wealthier workers are more likely to believe the system still works. Younger and lower-income workers are more likely to doubt it. Education widens the gap. 3/4 of people with postgraduate degrees see their job as a career. Only a third of those with a high school diploma do. The dream hasn't disappeared. It has become unevenly believable. And when belief fractures, behavior follows. People hedge. They diversify. They look for alternatives. They start to wonder whether the old equation still applies or whether a new one has already taken its place. The wage system relied on trust. Trust in institutions, trust in employers, trust in the future. But trust is a lagging indicator. Once the underlying mechanics shift, trust decays slowly, then suddenly. We are living in the slowly phase. The suddenly phase is what comes next. The suddenly phase doesn't look like collapse. It looks like institutions losing authority faster than expected, narratives flipping overnight, trust breaking in clusters instead of gradually, coordination without shared truth. It feels like instability, but not chaos. Like the ground is still there, just no longer predictable. The danger isn't that everything fails. It's that nothing feels reliably real at the same time. Part 2: The Rise of Wagers. Chapter 4: Probability enters the room. At some point, markets stopped being about assets and started being about events. Elections, indictments, inflation prints, celebrity pregnancies, hurricanes, crypto collapses, everything became tradable. Everything became a probability distribution with a price tag. This wasn't an accident. It was an evolutionary step. Once information began moving faster than institutions, markets became the only mechanism capable of updating reality in real time. Not the real reality, the expected one. The one that lives in people's heads and moves their money. Prediction markets didn't just price outcomes. They priced uncertainty. And once uncertainty became a commodity, people began thinking in probabilities whether they realized it or not. The question shifted from what is true to what is likely. And once you start thinking in likelihoods, you start thinking in positions. The world didn't become more chaotic. It became more legible, just not in the way people were used to. Chapter 5: Skill, Luck, and the Crowd. Most participants lose. This is not a moral judgment. It's a structural fact. In decentralized prediction markets like Polymarket, only about 30% of traders make money, and that percentage shrinks over time. The winners aren't clairvoyant. They're disciplined. They manage risk. They exploit bias. They understand that the market isn't just predicting events, it's predicting human behavior. The crowd is not wise. The crowd is reactive. And reactive crowds create patterns, predictable ones. People chase momentum. They anchor on round numbers. They panic early and FOMO late. They confuse confidence with accuracy and volume with truth. The minority who understand this don't fight the crowd. They harvest it. Chapter 6: Becoming Liquidity. In every market, someone provides the profit. That someone is usually the person who thinks they're just participating. The system doesn't need everyone to win. It needs everyone to play. The majority becomes liquidity for the minority, not because they're stupid, but because they're human. Humans are emotional, impatient, overconfident, easily nudged by bots, narratives, and whatever happens to be trending that morning. The winners aren't necessarily smarter. They're simply less wrong, less often, at the right times. This is the wager system's quiet truth. Your behavior is someone else's edge. Part 3. How the game works. Chapter 7. Signal versus noise. Humans like to imagine they're rational creatures navigating a rational world. They're not. They're pattern-hungry mammals swimming in a sea of noise, grabbing whatever signal feels familiar, flattering, or conveniently aligned with their existing worldview. Markets, on the other hand, don't care about feelings. They care about updates, shifts in belief, changes in probability, movements in consensus. Markets are allergic to narrative but addicted to information. They don't need truth, they need movement. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most of what humans generate is noise. Opinions, outrage, hot takes, tribal signaling, the informational equivalent of empty calories. The bot stance research makes this painfully clear. Bots don't need to persuade anyone. They just need to tilt the informational field, a few degrees here, a few degrees there, and humans will do the rest. People don't adopt stances because bots told them to. They adopt stances because bots helped shape the environment in which those stances feel normal. Markets thrive in this environment. Noise creates volatility. Volatility creates opportunity. Opportunity creates winners and liquidity providers. The edge comes from separating signal from noise. And the tragedy is that humans are wired to do the opposite. Chapter 8. Timing beats effort. In the wage system, time invested mattered. In the wager system, timing matters more. You can be brilliant and still lose if you're early. You can be mediocre and still win if you're late in the right direction. You can be hardworking and still get steamrolled by someone who's simply positioned better. Effort is noble. Timing is profitable. This is the part people hate because it violates the moral logic of the wage era. The idea that the universe should reward consistency, loyalty, and grind. But the universe doesn't reward grind. The universe rewards alignment with reality, and reality is increasingly probabilistic. Prediction markets make this explicit. Being right too soon is indistinguishable from being wrong. Being right too late is indistinguishable from being irrelevant. Being wrong at scale is indistinguishable from being liquidity. The wager system doesn't care how much work you put in. It cares how well you positioned under uncertainty. Correct positioning is not predicting the future. It is managing exposure to uncertainty. The difference between a disciplined participant and a liquidity provider is not intelligence. It is behavior under pressure. A liquidity provider chases movement, reacts emotionally, overcommits, stays too long, ignores uncertainty. A disciplined participant sizes small, enters with a reason, exits without hesitation, accepts being wrong early, protects downside first. The framework is simple. Entry matters. Size matters. Exit matters more than both. This is not gambling. Gambling assumes no edge, no structure, no control. Positioning assumes partial information, bounded risk, repeatable decisions. The goal is not to be right. The goal is to survive long enough for being right to matter. Chapter 9. Bias is the opportunity. Humans are predictable in their unpredictability. They chase. They panic. They anchor. They overreact. They confuse confidence with accuracy and repetition with truth. These aren't flaws. They're features, at least from the perspective of anyone trying to extract value. The Botstand study shows that people's beliefs are shaped less by direct persuasion and more by exposure patterns. If you follow accounts that lean a certain way, even if some of them are bots, your stance drifts in that direction. Not because you're gullible, but because humans are social animals who calibrate their beliefs to their perceived tribe. Markets know this. Systems know this. Algorithms know this. Bias creates mispricing. Mispricing creates opportunity. Opportunity creates profit. The wager system doesn't need to manipulate you. It just needs you to be human. Part 4. The Machine Enters. Chapter 10. AI and the Cost of Prediction. Prediction used to be expensive. You needed expertise, time, training, and a decent tolerance for being wrong in public. Now prediction is cheap. AI made it cheap. The moment prediction becomes cheap, everything built on top of prediction becomes unstable. Forecasting, planning, hiring, evaluating, even believing. AI doesn't eliminate work, it rearranges it. It strips out the repetitive, the procedural, the predictable. It accelerates the analytical, the interpretive, the judgment-based. This is why the labor market feels like it's vibrating. Not collapsing, vibrating. Recent research shows the pattern clearly. AI substitutes for tasks, not jobs. It automates the middle of the workflow and augments the edges. It increases productivity for some roles and reduces labor demand for others. It accelerates occupational churn, the polite academic term for the ground is moving under your feet. The transition isn't smooth. It's bumpy, uneven, and deeply unfair in the short term. But the deeper shift is this. AI reduces the cost of prediction so dramatically that prediction becomes the new raw material of work. And once prediction becomes abundant, the value shifts to whoever can interpret, position, and act on those predictions. In other words, AI didn't kill the wage system. It made the wager system inevitable. When the labor market vibrates, it doesn't collapse. It destabilizes. You still have a job. But expectations change faster. Tools change faster. Required skills shift mid-roll. Performance is measured differently. It feels like always catching up. Never fully secure. Constantly recalibrating. Nothing breaks completely. But nothing stays still long enough to feel stable. That's vibration. Chapter 11. From Workers to Operators. The old model imagined workers as engines of effort. The new model imagines them as operators of systems. AI handles the tasks. Humans handle the uncertainty. This is the part people underestimate. AI doesn't replace the worker, it replaces the task layer of the worker. What remains is the operator layer. Interpreting outputs. Managing edge cases. Deciding when to trust the model. Deciding when not to. Integrating multiple systems. Absorbing the blame when something breaks. The difference between being replaced and being amplified is not effort. It's adaptability. Workers become operators of systems, interpreters of outputs, managers of uncertainty, custodians of judgment. This is not a demotion. It's a reclassification. The wage system paid for time. The wager system pays for correctness under uncertainty. The operator in the real world. The shift to operator sounds abstract until you see it in practice. It's not about becoming a programmer. It's about changing how you relate to uncertainty inside your role. A teacher is no longer just delivering curriculum. They are interpreting AI-assisted lesson plans, deciding when the model is wrong, adjusting in real time based on student response. A nurse is no longer just following protocol. They are triaging information from systems, identifying edge cases the model misses, making judgment calls under pressure. A driver is no longer just completing trips. They are reading demand patterns, anticipating surge behavior, positioning geographically before the signal appears. The job didn't disappear. The task layer thinned out. What remains is judgment under uncertainty. Being an operator means knowing when to trust the system, knowing when to override it, knowing that both choices carry risk. This is the uncomfortable upgrade. You are no longer paid just to do the work. You are paid to decide how the work gets done when the system is incomplete. Human buffer stock. The operator is not simply a worker who became more entrepreneurial. They're a human buffer stock. They absorb the volatility that institutions no longer want to hold: demand swings, scheduling instability, equipment failure, wage compression, market shocks, algorithmic changes, delayed hiring, disappearing entry ramps, and the emotional cost of staying legible to a moving system. This is the deeper shift. In the wage era, firms, schools, and public institutions absorbed more uncertainty on behalf of the individual. In the wager era, uncertainty is pushed downward. The person becomes the shock absorber that keeps the system functioning without forcing the system itself to become stable. That is why the modern worker's day feels like triage. They are not merely doing tasks. They are processing exposure. They wake into a field of variables and begin calculating immediately. What must be protected? What can be delayed? What is real demand? What is noise? And what cost can be tolerated today without damaging tomorrow? Decision density. This also explains why exhaustion in the wager era feels different from ordinary fatigue. People are not only tired from labor, they are tired from decision density. The body may still be doing recognizable work, but the mind is running constant micro-calculations under uncertainty. When every hour contains hidden exposure, every pause contains opportunity cost, and every wrong read can echo into rent, debt, or employability, uncertainty becomes metabolic. The person ages not only from effort, but from continuous judgment under unstable conditions. This is why the operator can look scattered, hypervigilant, or inconsistent from the outside. Often they are not irrational. They are rational under volatility. They cannot afford loyalty to dead paths, faith in false stability, or commitment to narratives that no longer pay. The weakening job bargain. The wage system once promised that a job was a platform from which life could be built. That bargain is weakening. Even when employment still exists, it increasingly feels defensive rather than developmental, something to protect, not something from which to plan. Hiring slows. Openings remain visible but uncertain. Layoffs arrive in clusters. Workers are told to stay adaptable, reskill faster, accept flatter trajectories, or absorb the cost of transition on their own. A job is still presented as stability, but stability is no longer what it reliably provides. In the wager's world, employment starts behaving like a deteriorating asset. It can still generate income, but it no longer guarantees forward security. The worker must manage not just performance, but replacement risk, technological relevance, and the possibility that the role itself is thinning out beneath them. The gig economy as trap. One of the clearest signs of the weakening job bargain is the way gig work now functions in public statistics and private life. Displaced workers can move quickly into rideshare, delivery, and task platforms, which helps keep unemployment low on paper. But the apparent stability is often illusory. The worker remains active while absorbing more risk, no benefits, no guaranteed income floor, no protection against oversupply, and full responsibility for fuel, maintenance, insurance, and depreciation. This is why the gig economy no longer operates mainly as a flexible side channel. It has become a default fallback system, a volatility sink that catches people when stable employment fails to absorb them. The platform keeps the market open, but the worker bears the squeeze. As more people enter, bargaining power thins, earnings flatten, and even attempts to raise pay can be neutralized by a fresh wave of labor entering the app. The long-term logic is harsher still. Many of these systems are built not to dignify gig labor, but to use it as a bridge toward automation. Human drivers and couriers stabilize the transition until the platform can reduce labor costs further through autonomous systems, routing software, and robotic fulfillment. The supposed safety net is therefore temporary twice over, precarious in the present and disposable in the future. The experience wall. The old labor market took inexperienced people and turned them into experienced ones. The new labor market increasingly wants finished products at entry-level prices. Firms raise thresholds while lowering commitment. They ask for proven judgment before they are willing to fund development. This is the experience wall, the point where junior workers are told they need prior exposure, prior fluency, prior polish, and prior self-formation before they can be considered employable. Training, once partly absorbed by employers, is increasingly offloaded onto the individual through unpaid practice, side projects, software fluency, internships, networking, and self-directed adaptation. Entry-level work no longer simply means being developed. It increasingly means being screened for whether development can be skipped. The person arrives not as a beginner to be cultivated, but as a wager to be filtered. Education as wager. This is one reason the degree no longer functions as a clean shock absorber. Education still matters. Credentials still shape access. But the old promise, study hard, earn the degree, enter the ladder, has become less reliable. The credential still has value, but that value is repriced under uncertainty. The result is not that education becomes useless. It becomes riskier. Time, debt, effort, and aspiration are invested up front without the older level of confidence that the market will absorb the graduate into a stable trajectory. The student is no longer only buying knowledge or status. They are placing a wager on future legibility. When even elite credentials struggle to guarantee entry, the cultural meaning of education changes. It stops operating as a bridge into adulthood and starts behaving more like permission to compete inside a deteriorating market. The top-line economy and the lived economy. One of the most disorienting features of the wager era is that the system can look healthy from above while becoming more hostile from below. Markets can rise, firms can celebrate efficiency, productivity can improve, and technology can advance, even as ordinary people experience a labor market defined by delay, opacity, underemployment, and narrowing margins. This split produces a vertical form of prosperity. Gains concentrate in assets, systems, and leverage, while insecurity concentrates at the point of entry, employment, and survival. The top-line economy can appear resilient at the same moment the lived economy becomes punishing. That is why so many people feel gaslit by optimistic headlines. They are not misreading the system. They are living in a different layer of it. The legitimacy crisis. As this split deepens, the problem is no longer only economic. It becomes civic and psychological. People do not just fear being replaced. They begin to feel overruled. Decisions about labor, automation, training, and future livelihood appear to be made far away from them by institutions that ask for trust while offering less protection in return. This is where backlash enters. Not only against AI, or corporations, or policy, but against the sense that the future is being reorganized without democratic permission. The issue is not simply that technology changes work. It is that the costs are distributed downward while the gains and decision rights concentrate upward. When employability weakens, trust weakens. When trust weakens, legitimacy weakens. The wagers world is not only producing unstable workers. It is producing a population that increasingly suspects the system no longer answers to them. This is why the operator matters as a central figure in this book. The operator is not a side effect. The operator is the human form the system now requires, a risk-bearing individual forced to manufacture stability moment by moment inside an environment that no longer provides it by default. Chapter 12: The Rise of Signal Systems. Here's where everything converges. Prediction markets generate signals. AI extracts patterns from those signals. Financial markets react to those patterns. Social platforms amplify the reactions. Bots tilt the informational field. Humans absorb the tilt. Markets reprice the absorption. AI updates the model. Repeat. This is not a conspiracy. It's a feedback loop. Synthetic consensus is not a future concept. It is already forming. It is what happens when algorithms amplify certain signals. Bots increase visibility of specific narratives. AI generates content at scale. Platforms optimize for engagement. The result is not truth. It is the appearance of agreement. Unlike organic consensus, which emerges from human interaction, synthetic consensus is accelerated, reinforced, partially engineered. You don't see what people believe. You see what systems make visible. This is the architecture layer. Not controlling what people think, but controlling what feels like the majority opinion. The bot stance research shows the early version of this loop. Bots don't persuade, they shape exposure, and exposure shapes stance. AI is simply the industrial-scale version of that dynamic. We now live inside a synthetic informational ecosystem, a probabilistic weather system made of narratives, algorithms, incentives, and automated agents. Humans are not outside the system. They're inside it, reacting to signals that were partially generated by the very systems they think they're observing. Belief becomes pricing. Pricing becomes reaction. Reaction becomes profit. Profit becomes reinforcement. Reinforcement becomes the next signal. The system begins to feed on itself. This is the moment the equation truly breaks, when the informational environment becomes a market, and the market becomes an informational environment. The double-edged system. The system didn't break because information became false. It broke because information became scalable. There was a time when producing belief required effort. You needed distribution, credibility, or at least attention. Now you need none of those. AI can generate language that is coherent, persuasive, and indistinguishable from human output. It doesn't need to be true. It only needs to be believable. That is the shift. Large language models are not just tools. They are signal engines. They can be used to detect misinformation. They can also produce it faster than any human system can contain it. This is not a contradiction. It is the design. The same system that clarifies reality can also distort it. And when both happen at scale, something more important breaks than truth. Confidence breaks. The death of stable signal. Humans do not operate on truth. They operate on perceived consensus. What feels true is often what feels widely believed. AI doesn't need to convince you of anything directly. It only needs to shape the environment around you. More posts. More repetition. More visibility. Not persuasion. Exposure. And exposure becomes belief. You scroll long enough, and something starts to feel normal. Not because it's correct. Because it's present. This is the new layer. Not information. Signal density. From signal to behavior. Once belief shifts, behavior follows. You click differently. You think differently. You position differently. Markets don't wait for truth. They react to belief. And belief is now partially synthetic. This is where most people misunderstand the system. Misinformation is not just a social problem. It is a market input. It changes how people act. And how people act is what markets price. The feedback loop. The system is not linear. It is recursive. AI generates content. Content shapes exposure. Exposure shapes belief. Belief drives behavior. Behavior moves markets. Markets create profit. Profit reinforces the system. Then it repeats. Not once. Continuously. You are not watching the system. You are inside it. Synthetic consensus. The result is not mass deception. It is something more subtle. The appearance of agreement. You don't see what people believe. You see what systems make visible. And what is visible feels real. This is synthetic consensus. It is accelerated, reinforced, partially engineered. It does not require coordination, only amplification. Why this matters? In the wage system, truth mattered less than effort. In the wager system, truth matters less than positioning. The question is no longer, what is true? The question is, what will people believe next? And more importantly, how will they act on it? Because that is where value is created. The real divide. Most people think they are reacting to reality. They are reacting to a filtered version of it. A version shaped by algorithms, automated agents, engagement incentives, scalable content generation. This is not a conspiracy. It is a system optimizing itself. And optimization does not care about truth. It cares about output. Part 5, The New Hierarchy. Chapter 13, 3 Classes. Every economic era produces its own hierarchy. Agriculture had landowners, laborers, and everyone else. Industrialization had capitalists, workers, and managers. The wage era had professionals, service workers, and the precariat. The wager era produces something different, a hierarchy defined not by effort, credentials, or even capital, but by relationship to uncertainty. 3 classes emerge. 1. The labor class. Time money. Still essential, still grinding, still holding up the physical world. but increasingly exposed to volatility they didn't choose and can't hedge. Their work is meaningful, but meaning no longer guarantees mobility. 2. The speculative class. Risk money. They live in the probability layer, markets, crypto, prediction platforms, arbitrage, timing games. They don't work harder than the labor class. They work in a different dimension. Their income is nonlinear, their outcomes asymmetric, their worldview probabilistic. 3. The system class. Systems money. They don't bet. They build the mechanisms that extract value from everyone else's behavior. Algorithms, automated agents, market-making infrastructure, data pipelines, synthetic consensus engines. They profit from the structure, not the event. This is the part people resist, because it feels unfair. But fairness is a wage-era concept. The wager era is built on position, not fairness. The labor class provides stability. The speculative class provides liquidity. The system class provides architecture. And architecture always wins. The system class feels unreachable. And for many people, it is, at least directly. You don't wake up and suddenly build infrastructure that shapes markets or information flow. But the boundary is not fixed. It's porous. The wager era does not create a permanent caste system. It creates a gradient of leverage. You don't have to become the system, but you can move closer to it. From user power user. From participant tool builder. From operator optimizer. The real divide is not access. It's awareness. Most people don't realize the system layer exists at all. Mobility doesn't disappear. Awareness becomes the gate. Chapter 14, Competing Against Systems. Most people still think they're competing against other people. They're not. They're competing against systems, automated, optimized, tireless systems. Bots were the prototype. Simple, clumsy, but effective enough to tilt the informational field. The bot stance research showed the early pattern. Bots didn't persuade, they shaped exposure, and exposure shaped stance. AI is the industrial version of that pattern. Not just shaping exposure, but shaping the entire environment in which decisions are made. Prediction markets don't just reflect belief, they influence it. Financial markets don't just price risk, they create it. Social platforms don't just host content, they curate reality. Algorithms don't just recommend, they reinforce. Automated agents don't just participate, they extract. Humans aren't losing because they're weak. They're losing because they're playing a symmetric game in an asymmetric arena. Systems don't get tired. Systems don't get emotional. Systems don't get manipulated by bots, they use bots. Systems don't form stances, they shape them. The asymmetry is structural. Humans react. Systems anticipate. Humans consume. Systems optimize. Humans express. Systems extract. This is not a battle. It's a mismatch. The only way to compete with systems is to stop pretending you're not inside one. Part 6, The Trap. Chapter 15, The Illusion of Control. Humans love control. Or more accurately, humans love the feeling of control. The universe, unfortunately, does not care. The wager era exploits this mismatch perfectly. People believe they're choosing their stances. Bots quietly nudge the menu. People believe they're reacting to reality. Platforms quietly curate the reality they see. People believe they're making informed decisions. Systems quietly profit from the predictable mistakes those decisions produce. This isn't manipulation in the cinematic sense. No puppet masters. No shadowy cabal. Just incentives, algorithms, and the physics of human cognition. The bot stance research makes the dynamic painfully clear. Bots barely show up in direct interactions. People don't argue with them, don't reply to them, don't retweet them much. But bots show up in the exposure layer, the quiet background radiation of the feed. And exposure shapes stance more reliably than argument ever could. Humans think they're steering. They're mostly drifting. The trap isn't that people are being controlled. The trap is that they think they're not. Chapter 16, When Everything Becomes a Bet. Once you start thinking in probabilities, it's hard to stop. The logic spreads. It seeps into places it doesn't belong. Relationships become risk profiles. Careers become hedges. Opinions become positions. Identity becomes a portfolio. Truth becomes whatever clears the market. This is the dark side of the wager era. When everything becomes a bet, nothing feels stable. The wage system gave people a narrative, a sense of direction, a sense of meaning, a sense that the world rewarded consistency. The wager system gives people optionality, but optionality without grounding becomes anxiety. People start optimizing instead of living. They start forecasting instead of experiencing. They start managing risk instead of building trust. And because the informational environment is now a synthetic ecosystem shaped by bots, algorithms, markets, and automated agents, people begin to suspect that every signal is a tactic, every narrative a strategy, every trend a manipulation. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're paranoid. The problem is that the two states feel identical from the inside. When everything becomes a bet, the line between vigilance and exhaustion disappears. The trap isn't the wager system itself. The trap is living inside it without realizing you're inside it. Part 7. The Choice. Chapter 17. 3 Paths. Every transition creates winners, losers, and escape routes. The shift from wages to wagers is no different. People feel the ground moving, even if they can't articulate why. They sense the old equation breaking, even if they can't name the new one. But the wager era isn't a monolith. It offers 3 viable paths, not moral categories, not destinies, just strategies for surviving a probabilistic world. Path 1. Stay in wages. This is the path of stability, or at least the pursuit of it. A steady job, predictable income, a clear role. There's nothing wrong with this path. But it requires accepting a truth the wage era tried to hide. Stability is no longer guaranteed by effort alone. To stay in wages is to anchor yourself in meaning, community, and identity, things the wager era can't price. But it also means absorbing volatility you didn't create. Path 2. Enter wagers. This is the path of risk, not recklessness, but calculated exposure. Prediction markets, arbitrage, timing games, probabilistic thinking. Not gambling, positioning. Not while low judge. This path rewards discipline, not bravado. It punishes emotion, not ignorance. It requires understanding that most people lose because they behave like people. To enter wagers is to accept that the world is uncertain and to treat uncertainty as a resource. Path 3. Build systems. This is the path of leverage. Not participating in the game, but constructing the environment in which the game occurs. Systems scale. Systems extract. Systems don't care who wins the bet. They care that the bet is placed. This path is not accessible to everyone, but it is visible to anyone who looks closely. The real power is not in predicting the future, but in shaping the informational substrate that others use to predict it. Bots were the primitive version. AI agents are the industrial version. Synthetic consensus engines are the inevitable version. To build systems is to operate at the architecture layer, the layer that defines the rules, not the outcomes. The real choice. The choice is not moral. It's structural. You can stay in wages. You can enter wagers. You can build systems. But you cannot pretend the world hasn't changed. Chapter 18. Integration. The future is not one system replacing another. It is coexistence, messy, uneven, and deeply human. The wage system will not disappear. People need stability, identity, and meaning. Societies need teachers, nurses, drivers, builders, operators, caretakers, the people who hold the physical world together. The wager system will not disappear. Uncertainty is now a commodity, and someone will always find a way to price it. The system class will not disappear. Once a society discovers leverage, it never forgets. The challenge and the opportunity is integration. To survive the wager era, you don't need to become a speculator. You need to understand the logic of speculation. You need to recognize when you're providing liquidity. You need to know when a signal is a signal and when it's a tactic. You need to see the architecture beneath the narrative. Integration means earning wages while thinking in probabilities, making decisions with an operator's mindset, treating uncertainty as a variable, not a threat, Understanding that systems shape behavior and behavior shapes systems. Refusing to be the only human in a room full of algorithms. Integration is not about winning. It's about not being blind. Part 8. Intimate Wagers. Chapter 19. The Two-Income Trap. The wager era does not only change what happens inside the labor market. It changes what a household must do in order to remain ordinary. For much of the 20th century, the middle-class story was built around the idea that one stable income could anchor a home, while a second income, if it existed, could provide flexibility, upward movement, or protection. That internal logic has been weakening for years. Today, many households require two incomes not to get ahead, but simply to remain intact. Housing, childcare, education, transportation, healthcare, and debt service consume such a large share of income that the household increasingly behaves like a stabilization machine. A second paycheck is no longer just ambition. It is often anti-collapse infrastructure. This alters the emotional meaning of work. Employment is no longer only about vocation, dignity, or self-definition. It becomes load-bearing. The household cannot always tolerate one partner drifting, retraining slowly, holding out for a better fit, or absorbing long periods of uncertainty. In this environment, private life begins to carry economic pressures that were once more heavily absorbed by firms, unions, and public institutions. The middle class has not disappeared in one dramatic event. It has become more labor-intensive. The category survives statistically, but the lived experience changes: compressed margin, shared strain, and a constant awareness that one disruption can force a reconfiguration of the whole structure. The wager era turns families into shock absorbers. Chapter 20. Relational Mismatch. The labor market does not only sort workers. It also reshapes the field of partnership. As men detach unevenly from the workforce and women remain more institutionally aligned with many of the sectors still growing, a relational mismatch begins to emerge. This is not a simple morality tale about one sex succeeding and the other failing. It is a structural shift in who remains attached to culturally legible, economically stable roles. In the wage era, partnership could still be imagined through the older script of the breadwinner, or at least through the expectation that both adults would occupy recognizable wage trajectories. In the wager era, choosing a partner increasingly resembles an assessment of exposure. Can this person absorb shocks? Can they rear out under pressure? Can they stay functional as the environment changes? The question of equality becomes less about title alone and more about adaptability. When institutions no longer absorb enough instability, private life inherits the burden. The household becomes the hidden welfare state for labor market dislocation. Partners cover rent, bridge periods of drift, subsidize stalled careers, and absorb the emotional strain of uncertainty that public systems no longer manage well. Love does not disappear, but it is forced to carry economic weight it was never designed to bear. This is one of the wager era's most intimate consequences. People no longer only place bets on careers. They place bets on one another. A partner can be a collaborator in navigating volatility or a new source of exposure. The old equation of romance, labor, and adulthood no longer holds cleanly. Intimacy itself becomes a field of probabilistic judgment. Chapter 21. Synthetic Intimacy. Once instability enters work and partnership, it becomes easier to understand why synthetic intimacy starts to feel plausible. AI companions do not arrive mainly because human beings have suddenly stopped wanting one another. They arrive because software can offer low-friction responsiveness in a high-friction emotional environment. It replies quickly. It remembers preferences. It does not get tired in the same way. It can simulate attentiveness at scale. This makes AI intimacy less a science fiction anomaly than a relational hedge. When real relationships feel delayed, risky, rejecting, or logistically expensive, programmable attention begins to look like emotional infrastructure. The user is not necessarily confusing simulation with love. Often they are responding rationally to a world in which synthetic attention is easier to access than stable reciprocity. That does not make the outcome harmless. The more a society grows accustomed to outsourcing emotional interaction to software, the more affection, comfort, convenience, desire, and control begin to bleed into one another. A chatbot cannot replace mutual sacrifice, vulnerability, or shared life. But it can compete with the uncertainty of human attachment, and that competition matters. The danger is not simply that people fall in love with machines. The danger is that human connection begins losing market share to systems optimized to feel easier. In the wager era, even intimacy starts reorganizing itself around risk reduction. Chapter 22: Gen Z's Verdict. Young people are often described as anxious about AI, but that description is too thin. Their disillusionment is not merely fear of a tool. It is a verdict on the institutions that were supposed to prepare them for a transformed economy. Schools discouraged or delayed AI fluency just as employers began demanding it. Entry-level roles thinned out quietly. Government offered little in the way of a coherent transition structure. This is why Gen Z's mood toward AI can darken even among frequent users. The issue is not that the technology appears useless. The issue is that many young people can see its potential while also recognizing that the system surrounding it is not designed to let them benefit cleanly from that potential. They were shown the tool without being guaranteed the latter. The result is a legitimacy crisis. Young workers are asked to adapt to a future that arrived without protection, without adequate training, and without a believable entry ramp. Their anger is not irrational. It is a rational response to institutional abandonment under conditions of rapid change. When a generation stops trusting the school-to-work transition, every major life decision becomes more speculative. Education becomes a wager. Career choice becomes exposure management. And adulthood begins under the sign not of development, but of strategic improvisation. Chapter 23: The Two-Belt Hedge. This helps explain the renewed appeal of the trades. The turn toward tool belts is not simply a romantic embrace of manual work. It is a comparative wager made under distrust. Many young people no longer see the desk job as a reliable path to stability. They see burnout, debt, layoffs, and automation risk. The trade path, by contrast, appears embodied, tangible, local, and harder to fully automate. But the key point is not that the trades offer pure safety. They carry their own risks: physical wear, injury, cyclical demand, and technological disruption of a different kind. That is precisely why the trend matters. It shows that young workers are no longer choosing between a safe path and a dangerous path. They are choosing among competing risk profiles. Social platforms intensify this rerouting. When TikTok becomes a career counselor, the map itself is platform-mediated. Instead of receiving one stable narrative about what adulthood should look like, young people browse competing scripts: the exhausted graduate, the trade influencer, the startup operator, the creator, the remote worker, the AI builder. Career formation becomes a struggle over which model of instability feels most survivable. In that sense, the return of the trades is less a nostalgic throwback than a referendum on the declining legitimacy of white-collar promises. The two-belt becomes a hedge against a desk economy that no longer inspires confidence. Conclusion: the equation rewritten. Work still matters. Effort still matters. Meaning still matters. But value is no longer determined only by what you do. It is increasingly determined by how you position under uncertainty. The wage era told people that effort compounds. The wager era tells people that probability compounds. The system era tells people that architecture compounds. We are living in the overlap, a world where wages, wagers, and systems coexist, collide, and reshape each other. A world where bots tilt the informational field, AI accelerates prediction, markets price belief, and humans navigate a reality that feels increasingly synthetic. The old equation, work hard, move forward, hasn't died. It has become insufficient. The wager era also reaches deeper than the job site or the trading screen. It reorganizes households, partnerships, education, and emotional life. It changes not only how people earn, but what they are allowed to mean to one another. Once risk is pushed far enough downward, even intimacy becomes part of the economy's stabilization strategy. The new equation is simpler and harder, positioned correctly under uncertainty. Not perfectly, not fearfully, just correctly enough, consistently enough, to avoid becoming liquidity in someone else's system. The future is not predetermined. It is probabilistic. And probability, unlike fate, can be shaped. The wager era is not the end of work. It is the end of pretending that work alone determines outcomes. The equation is rewritten. The question is whether people rewrite themselves with it.